Today, I'm going to share with you 9 things that doctors and I tend to disagree with. I'm going to show you how I think about things. I'm going to share how I believe they think about things and why they disagree, so that you can ultimately have your own opinion about each of these things, so you can properly move forward for yourself on your IVF journey. This is all about you learning more to have more control over your IVF journey and building the family of your dreams. All right, let's dive right in. The first thing that we tend to disagree on, you're not going to be surprised if you follow me, is the dosing of the stimulation drugs and the dosing throughout the stimulation drugs. Now, what I am going to share in terms of how doctors tend to think about this is in general, I want to say 90+% of the time that I see. I work with doctors all around the world. Well, I consult with clients working with doctors all around the world. Are there doctors who think like I do? Absolutely. But what I am talking about is the majority of the doctors that are thinking something else. All right, so let's get started. Dosing to start, you know how I feel about high doses. What am I talking about high doses? When you take both, let's just use an example, Gonal-F and Menopur, or FSH or Follistim and Mariofert or something like that. And you combine it, and the doses combined is like 375 or like, let's call it 450, because I see a lot of 300 Gonal-F, 150 Menopur. That tends to be too high for most, and I disagree with that. You go any higher than that, and I actually have anxiety. So that is the one thing, the starting dosing of the medication, I tend to like it. I tend to see better results on the lower end. And again, how low totally depends on your follicle count. That's the main thing. If I'm going with dosing, I'm looking at a follicle count, to be honest, specifically just for stimulation drugs, right? If we're talking about priming, antagonist, trigger shot, other criteria go into that. But just when we're talking about stimulation drugs, I'm looking at the number of follicles. And yeah, I tend to like 375 or less total dosing, depending on your total number of follicles. Why doctors tend to like 450 total, that'd be like the 300, 150 or higher. Well, I think that's how it's been done for many years, or for many plus like 40 years. But I also talked to a doctor about this, and she explained to me how the research says that the dosing of the medication, whether it's lower or higher, doesn't really matter. She said, however, that research is faulty, like most research is, because they were using clients from all types of ages. So they were, all types of issues. So good follicle count to low follicle count to high follicle count. So they didn't separate it out by what is your follicle count. Because her and I do believe that based on your follicle count, you get a more specific dosing amount. But my comment back to her was, well, if it doesn't matter, why wouldn't you just go lower? Because that's more medication for the person putting into her body and paying for it. And so we got into a little discussion about that. But ultimately, most doctors feel that the higher the stims, the more follicles you're going to recruit. What I have seen is when you are doing medium-ish to lower stim, okay, at the lowest, you would start, well, I don't even want to go there, but for the majority of people, it would be somewhere between 150 to 375 to start, with the majority being 300 to 375 to start, to be honest, okay? So overall, I think the majority of people should be between 300 and 375 total units to start. That is totally based on, I'm not looking at your history, and I do not know your follicle count, okay? Once you get that would really solidify what it is, because some need to start at like 150. And And, but rarely do you need to start over 375. So that's what I would say about the dosing. And then in terms of throughout the stims, I tend to like to see lower dosing throughout the stims instead of higher dosing throughout the stims. Because in general, when the dosing goes lower, exactly when to lower the dose is absolutely based on the results. But when it goes lower, especially towards the end, we tend to keep more even follicles. Again, doctors don't agree with this, okay? I have heard many, many doctors say, we want to increase the stims because we want to give medicine to those smaller follicles, that are coming up. I don't agree. I see when you increase the stim drugs, especially in the middle of a cycle or in the middle of stimulation drugs, you get more uneven follicles. Those alpha follicles take it and run. And then the beta follicles, the smaller ones behind it, are still like, I can't get any medicine. I'm still going to stay small. All right. That's what I tend to see. Okay. The second thing that doctors and I tend to disagree on are diagnostic tests, specifically when it comes to transfers. I personally like to see a hysteroscopy a lot. Okay. That is when a camera goes up and looks at the uterus, directly onto the uterus. Okay. Most doctors tend to like to do a saline ultrasound. And that's where you do an ultrasound image, right? You're not inside the uterus, you're outside the uterus trying to look in. Why I like a hysteroscopy is they are more exact. Okay. You are looking at the actual uterus instead of outside of the uterus looking in, as well as there are things pending who's doing it and pending the technology. So again, I feel like saline ultrasounds are more subjective. You cannot find certain things on a saline ultrasound as easily as you can on a hysteroscopy. For example, scar tissue. For example, hydrosalpinx, which is fluid around the fallopian tubes. Okay, so if you have something big like a polyp, that tends to show up on both. But again, I like to know for sure that nothing is going to block implantation. And I have had clients where they've had failed. And I'm like, get a hysteroscopy. And the doctor's like, I won't do it. And finally, they go, either the doctor agrees eventually, or they go to another provider. And unfortunately, there was a lot of scar tissue. And they're like, is this the reason why I had failed implantation? Of course, the answer is, I don't know, but it couldn't hurt. It couldn't help. Right. And so why doctors don't like to do a saline ultrasound, hysteroscopy, is because you tend to have to go under anesthesia for a hysteroscopy. It's not that invasive. It's just painful. You're sticking a camera through your cervix. Okay. So, and then if they find something you want to get it removed just right there. So for that reason, they don't want you to have to go through the hassle of going under anesthesia, which means an OR, which means it can't be in office, and it's more expensive, though insurance in the States typically pays for it. And it's just bigger hassle. Okay. The reasoning doctors don't want a hysteroscopy is tend to be like, it's not needed. We did a saline ultrasound and didn't find anything. It's not needed. Yes, I get that, but we don't know for sure. I'm all about checking off the box with when I'm preparing somebody for a transfer. There is a checklist and we check off the box. Do we know for sure with what we can control? Do we know for sure that this is not getting in the way of implantation? And your uterus is absolutely one of the things. Other diagnostic tests that I tend to want, or the doctor wants that, and we disagree on, is ERA. I say no to ERAs. Some doctors say yes to ERAs. Endometrial receptivity array. Basically, it's about finding implantation timing. For me, I think what needs to happen instead of changing implantation timing, specifically the amount of days that you're on progesterone, that's what the ERA is checking for. How many days should you be on progesterone before the transfer? For me, I'm like, hello, let's change this protocol. Okay, we've been doing the same medicated protocol and it's not working. Let's change the protocol. I also like to really take into account if my client is in survival mode or in reproductive mode. All right. We have really obvious issues, physical, mental ailments, even down to little things like eczema or acne or a headache or a painful period. I'm taking that as your body is in survival mode. Okay. So these are the things where if I see failed frozen embryo transfers, if I see failed those, I'm not going to, we need to spend $3,500 on an ERA. I'm going to, let's look at the protocol. Let's look at if your body is in survival mode. Let's look at my diagnostic test to see if there's anything we can find that we're missing. Okay. So that tends to be a discrepancy. Scratching, if you do a hysteroscopy, you basically get a scratch. I think, that could, I don't know if it could help, but it can't hurt, I guess. Like, how much is it? And do I think it's really going to do anything? No. Embryo glue? No. Genetic testing, we also tend to disagree on because, at least if I'm working with my clients in the States, depending which clinic they're going to, some clinics are almost pushing genetic testing. I don't think genetic testing is for everyone. And again, I'm a little bit different where if you're older and have less embryos, I say don't test, right? That is definitely not what you're hearing from the doctor. They're like, you have to test. I don't want you having a late miscarriage. I don't want you having a genetically abnormal child. Neither do I. Hello. And genetic testing isn't perfect. This is like a whole other podcast I should do, but genetic testing isn't perfect. And especially when my clients are older, it's almost impossible to get that normal. So how many egg retrievals are we going to do to get that normal, which, by the way, you're not actually testing the embryo. So it absolutely could be normal, even though it's showing it's not normal. And you've just done 5 egg retrievals, have 1 embryo to show for it. What are we doing here, right? If the next conversation is, well, stop or do egg donor, why don't we just put some embryos on ice that aren't tested? Okay. Again, the exact strategy that I would have for my clients would really depend on many, many, many factors. But in general, when I am working with a client and she's in the United States and she's at a certain clinic, they force genetic testing, and I tend to be a lot more cautious when it comes to genetic testing. All right, number 3, the number of days on stimulation drugs. A lot of the doctors that my clients are working with say, I like 8 to 9 days on stimulation drugs. Not me. I like about 11 number of days on stimulation drugs. I say give or take a day. So call it between 10 and 12, but 11 being kind of like, this is nice, right? I believe, and when I say I believe, it's not like I make this stuff up. I'm not like, what should I think today? What have I seen work over and over and over again around the world thousands of times? This is what I'm talking about when I talk about what I believe, okay? When you grow eggs slower, they tend to be healthier. What do I mean by healthier? They tend to grow to blast and be normal. Okay, not all my clients test, a lot of them do, but for those that are testing, we're seeing more normal embryos when we not just draw out the length of time on stimulation drugs. A lot of other things go into us creating more energy for these embryos, but when we can draw out the number of days on stims, that means they're growing slower. Okay, because we don't want them bigger just because they've been growing longer. We want to keep, remember, about 80% of the follicles between 16 and 19, pending your millimeters, okay? 80% of the follicles between 16 and 19 millimeters, pending your age, okay? So that's the number of days on stims. I tend to disagree. And when I see 9 days, I'm like, but if they got to, if you have, after 9 days, 20 plus millimeter follicles, you got to trigger, right? So slow it down, longer on stims, and something that could help is to lower the stim drugs. That tends to help. Okay. Number 5, not monitoring to know for sure. Now, I do understand that sometimes people are wanting to be monitored all the time, and it absolutely is unnecessary. Okay, there are certain times to monitor throughout taking stim drugs or as you're leading up to a transfer or after for very specific reasons. But here are 3 times where I like to know what they are, and I don't always have that data available because the doctor is saying it's not necessary. 1, if the follicles are not responding to the stimulation drugs, I want to know what is and that means, you've been on stimulation drugs for 5-ish days, give or take, and your follicles are still like 3 or 4 millimeters. They're not, and your estrogen is low. So what is your estrogen? And I also like to know what is the FSH, because once the FSH for me goes above a certain level, I know immediately what we need to do next to try and save that egg retrieval. If I don't know the FSH as well as the follicle sizes, as well as the estrogen, we tend to have to wait a couple more days to see what happens next. So trying to correct things as soon as possible, I like to know that FSH then. I also like to know FSH before starting stimulation drugs, right? Did the priming protocol work? Are we in a position where we're not going to get lead follicles? Because FSH is typically an issue with my clients with a lower egg reserve. So every follicle needs to count. Always, but especially when you don't have that many follicles creating eggs. All right. So that's another time where I like to know the FSH. I tend to want to know progesterone levels a lot more than doctors do when it comes to after a transfer. So most doctors are like, okay, you're about to do a transfer. Let's check your progesterone. All right. It's like 20-ish or over 20. It looks good. Okay, let's go. And then they never check it again. I have been in, so estrogen gets you pregnant, progesterone keeps you pregnant. I have been in situations where, I've had clients with a lot of pregnancy losses. And once we start tracking their estrogen, just naturally what it does on the medication, what it does, and we start to see a dip, that's where we potentially ask the doctor, should we add in more medication? I have seen women that have had multiple pregnancy losses, increase their progesterone at some point because they saw the dip and keep the pregnancy. Okay. Would it have kept either way? Let's say yes. That being said, I don't know. So if something as simple as get a blood test and check your progesterone is going to help you keep a pregnancy, I say let's do it. Let me just pause there for a second. And how can you talk to the doctor about these things? It depends on what you're asking for, but something like progesterone during a frozen embryo transfer, the conversation isn't, you have to take my progesterone, okay? The conversation is about explaining, I have had fails in the past. I want to know if my progesterone is dropping earlier than it typically should be, and my body's not kind of sustaining the estrogen on its own. This data would just make me feel more comfortable. Okay, so because of what has happened to me in the past, or because of what I have seen my sister, friend, whatever go through, I know this may not be totally necessary, but this data will help me feel more comfortable moving forward. Are you okay with doing this extra test? And if it's, a lot of times doctors will put together a package that includes a certain amount of tests and things like that. And you can ask, if this is not included in the package, how much does it cost? And then you can see if you're willing to pay for it out of pocket. Okay. Okay. Number 6, I don't love medicated frozen embryo transfer protocols for most, unless there's a reason. I tend to see everybody do a medicated cycle. That's where you sometimes start with birth control, and then you go into estrogen, or you just, start with estrogen and you're you're using estrogen to build your lining. If you have issues building your lining, okay, that protocol, as well as like 4 others that don't include estrogen, can be used. If you have wonky hormones, so you have a crazy high FSH, and you just tend to have, your hormones just tend to be like all over the place, right? Or you don't have a period, or you don't ovulate on your own, or get a period on. Okay, we need to control this, right? And that's where a medicated cycle absolutely comes in. And it comes in other times too. But what I'm finding is everybody is kind of put on the medicated transfer cycle. And honestly, I can't stand that, because 1, it's unnecessary medication, but whatever. 2, a lot of people are estrogen dominant and don't know it. And so the estrogen is actually a little inflammatory to the patient. That's the only way to describe it. Okay. So if you are estrogen dominant, and that, like, some signs are, of course, PCOS, endometriosis, but other signs can just be like uncomfortable, heavy, uncomfortable periods. If you go on the pill and you're like crazy, like I was, that's estrogen dominance. Another sign is really snappy, moody. Okay. How I know all this is because I am estrogen dominant, but I didn't find this out until I was in my mid-40s and obviously done having my kids. But I remember being on the medicated cycle, and finally my uterine lining started actually retreating. It was like such a sign that this was not the right protocol for me. My uterus was like, I will not participate. Okay. And estrogen is meant to build the lining. So when you see something like that, which I've seen in so many of my clients, we know you're probably estrogen dominant. You need a protocol without estrogen. Yet, I find most doctors do the go-to. So why they want to do the medicated cycle is you can control the timing so much better. A lot of doctors like to do their own transfer, but they don't work every day, right? They want to be there for you. And so they're like, okay, let's control this so that we can pick the exact date of your transfer. That's really nice, right? And so that would be a reason why they would want to do a medicated frozen embryo transfer cycle. All right, number 7. I believe that supplements and nutrition and sleep can absolutely help you get and stay pregnant. Okay, this is all the second out of the 3 pillars that I have: this science, survival mode shift, and spirit. This is all about the survival mode shift. It just makes sense to me that if your body is in chronic survival mode, your brain is going to not be like, yeah, let's give all of our resources to this parasite that wants to grow in us for 9 months. Even though we're lacking energy, we are totally depleted, we can hardly sustain ourselves, and I'm doing my best job. Let's grow another human. Your brain's never going to allow that. It is, to me, it's just common sense. When there are physical or mental ailments clearly showing up, do something about figuring those out. Thyroid issue that I had. Why do I have a thyroid issue? Nobody ever asked. Nobody ever figured that out until I started working with somebody who did. I just got a medication to lower the thyroid. Why was I having migraines? Why was I having stomach issues? Why was I having so much stress that I actually had like anxiety attacks? Why? Why did I have such low testosterone that it was almost like undetectable? Nobody figured out the why until I worked with the correct people, ultimately way after my fertility journey. But how would a body that is so off and depleted be able to easily get and stay pregnant? It all makes so much sense to me. And remember, I really had issues with I was going to say number 2. I did have issues with number 2. That was part of the digestion. But having my child number 2 is really what I had issues for, because I was young enough to have my first. My body was like, you're in a state of depletion, but okay, whatever. You're 33, 34. By the time I was ready for number 2, I was so depleted having a toddler than trying this again. It just makes common sense. So I do feel that supplements, nutrition, and sleep the right way. You guys need to stop being so hard on yourselves with nutrition, by the way, but the right way can absolutely affect your fertility, and not just making it easier to get and stay pregnant, but a big thing that doctors disagree with me are that your AMH can increase, that your FSH can decrease. When you do the things to get your body out of survival mode and in reproductive mode means you have an excess of resources, an excess of energy, and your hormones are balanced. Okay. All of these things. So that more balanced hormones means better looking levels of your hormones. Okay, so number 8, I kind of combined number 7, number 8. So number 7 was supplements and nutrition can't help. That's what we disagree on. I think they absolutely could help. Number 8, technically, because I just go off on tangents, was about how hormones being out of whack, gut issues, inflammation issues like allergies, mold, knowing if you have it or not, are not something that is properly discussed and treated before. Even stress. I know everybody says that if you just relax, you get pregnant. That's not what I'm talking about. There's no way you just have stress and no other physical ailments showing up. Okay. So stress is creating all these other elements, or all these other elements are creating stress. It all works together. So number 8 was technically that when doctors aren't typically looking for these things. And I absolutely am looking for these things. And more specifically, not me as much as the brilliant functional medicine expert that is on my team is looking for these things. I have a story that I think will really resonate with some of you. So most people hire me for the science. Okay, Tasha, what should my protocol be? What should I discuss with the doctor? Come up with questions for the doctor. Come up with how to discuss things with the doctor, how to suggest things without sounding, rude or impatient. Yes. Okay. So I will tell you that high 90s people, hire me for the science, but I have 3 pillars for a reason. If your body has major issues, whether you know about it or not, no science is going to help. So I had this client who has a nice high follicle count, right? And she always got that really uneven growth of her follicles. And that's why she hired me. Can you show me how to even them up, make more embryos, all that? Yes, yes, yes. So we do that. Her doctor's on board. She has her best looking egg retrieval ever. It is so exciting. These follicles are growing so evenly. She has so many right in that perfect range. She's going to be on stim drugs the perfect amount of time. It's looking great. When it came down to it, she had no blasts, nothing. How did that happen? That does not make sense to me. I've been doing this since 2016. I have never seen that. Well, my functional medicine expert got on some things, had her do some testing, and it turns out she has crazy mold toxicity. It's something she always kind of suspected, but she found out for sure that she has mold toxicity. She asked, is this why? And of course, I don't know, but let's absolutely figure that out and work on that for a couple of months and then go back to an egg retrieval. So the perfect egg retrieval, the perfect science, even the results couldn't have been better. I have never seen it not turn out to be more successful results at the end. And this was such a sign of when your body is in chronic survival mode, no science can help. So I hope that's inspiring to you to always look at these other things. And again, I've said this many times, don't blame your doctors for not bringing these things up to you. They have been brilliantly trained in their specialty of IVF. Okay. And that's okay. We don't want them to have to know everything. We're working with them for the IVF. What I'm challenging you to do is to also work with somebody on hormone balancing, a brilliant functional medicine expert to then come in and do her detective work like Becca in my group does. Okay. If you are in my workshop, you get the science, the survival mode, and the spirit part of making sure nothing is going to get in the way of you getting and staying pregnant as quickly, as easily as possible. And that leads me to the last thing that the doctors and I tend to disagree on, which is that some chick on the internet would know more about IVF protocols than a doctor. I get that. However, and let me tell you, when I was starting 2016, 17, probably even 18, I wasn't, of course the doctors know more than me. I was just telling what I had found out and what I had discovered. And then time and time again, I'm creating a formula in my head. Okay. I'm consulting with doctors on this formula. I'm watching clinical evidence from around the world come in, thousands of protocols coming in, dozens, hundreds of different clinics. So this is great data coming in, and I'm seeing what works over and over again. Once my formula couldn't be disproven, and trust me, I've seen it try to be disproven by doing different ways or opposite ways, I no longer thought that IVF doctors knew more than me. I am in a very special position of getting to see thousands of case studies around the world. I don't know if doctors get that or not. I've had conversations with IVF doctors going, why don't they know this? Why don't they know that this protocol won't work? And it seems to be the lack of research. I get it. Doctors need research to do things. Okay. But we're not going to get research on everything, right? Research is flawed and it's expensive and it's difficult to do. We're not going to get research on everything. I also get, hey, if it ain't broke, why fix it? Okay. And that might be the mentality of a lot of clinics. Hey, our success rates are good enough. We're making good enough money. Nothing's broken. Why are we trying to fix it? I get that too. I also get some doctors, the more you stay at one clinic, the less you learn. This is how they do it. It's not really by country that I see certain protocols. It's by clinic that I see certain protocols. Because the United States has all different types of clinics and protocols, but every country tends to, I haven't seen like this country tends to do it this way. Nope, it really depends on the clinic. So I get that the more somebody is at one clinic, the less they're going to see. But overall, I can say with absolute conviction, and I understand this is being recorded and being sent to a lot of people, I absolutely know more than fertility doctors do about protocols. And that's a crazy statement for some chick on the internet to make. But I fully, wholeheartedly believe it. I'm not saying every IVF doctor. I'm saying the majority are not doing the most optimized protocols for IVF. And if you are wondering if your protocol is as optimized as possible, we should talk. If you are considering hiring me as an IVF consultant, we should talk. Not somebody from my team. You and I should talk. So I am going to put my personal scheduling link in the show notes. You can also email me, tasha@tashablasi.com, and say, I would love to learn more about your consulting services. Can we talk? Okay. Or write whatever you want. Just say, can we talk? Okay. And I will absolutely send you my scheduling link for a free call. All right. So those were the 9 things that doctors and I tend to disagree on. And I really hope you take me up on that free call that we can do together. And even if you've already talked to somebody on my team in the past, but you and I haven't talked, or maybe you and I haven't talked in a long time, and you're still curious about what it looks like to work with me now, things change, definitely set up time to talk so we can have that call together, Mama. Well, that was our uncovering for the day. If you have a feeling that your IVF protocols or strategies could use a second opinion, start with our website, tashablasi.com, for resources and even a free discovery call where we can learn about your specific IVF needs and see how we can help.